Let me tell you something very real, something people don't always want to face. When you go no contact with a narcissist, you aren't just stepping away from a person. You're stepping into a battle of truth against delusion, of dignity against domination. And most importantly, you're stepping into a rediscovery of yourself. But here's the part we don't talk about enough. That narcissist you walked away from, they're still hoping. Hoping you'll fold, hoping you'll slip, hoping you'll come back, not out of love, but because they need to believe they still have control. This isn't just emotional drama. This is spiritual warfare wrapped in psychological manipulation. And today, we're going to dismantle every twisted hope they cling to when you go no contact. Because once you understand what they want, you'll never again be fooled by what they pretend to need. 1. They hope you'll be the first to break the silence. There's a moment, often quiet, often invisible to the outside world, when a person reaches the edge of what they can endure. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but in the soul, when the soul says, "That's enough." That's the moment you decided to go no contact. And make no mistake, that moment was an act of war, not against the narcissist, but against the years you spent betraying yourself to keep someone else comfortable. Now here's the hard truth. The narcissist didn't flinch when you went silent, not in the way you'd expect. They didn't feel shame. They didn't feel guilt. What they felt was anticipation, because from their twisted lens of reality, silence isn't final. It's a test, a storm before the calm. They believe silence is weakness in disguise, a temporary state that proves you still care, still feel, still react. They assume your silence isn't built on conviction, but on wounded pride. And they tell themselves, just wait, they'll be back. They always come back. You see, a narcissist doesn't process abandonment like a healthy person. To them, being left isn't about grief. It's about control lost. It's about a mirror cracking. You were that mirror. You reflected the version of themselves they needed to believe in, admired, wanted, irreplaceable. But now that mirror is gone, shattered, and all that's left is the jagged truth they refuse to face. That's why they hope you'll be the first to break the silence, not because they love you, but because they need you to restore the illusion that they're still in control, that they still matter, that they're still central in your world, even if it's through conflict or confusion. You reaching out, even just once, confirms the lie they live by, that they are unforgettable, that they are still powerful. They've likely rehearsed this moment in their mind, played out different versions of it. You text them, you call them, you bump into them somewhere and offer a smile, a conversation, a glance, and in that fantasy they win, not because of what you say, but because you said something, anything, because it means the silence, your silence, wasn't real strength. It was just time passing. What they don't see, what they never bothered to understand, is what that silence cost you. They didn't see the months, maybe years, where you kept giving second chances, the way you justified their moods, absorbed their blame, bent over backwards just to avoid another emotional ambush. They didn't hear the late-night cries, the whispered prayers, the therapy sessions where you struggled to even call it abuse, because the abuse was always disguised as love. They weren't there when you stared at your phone, heart pounding, resisting the urge to explain yourself one more time, to get closure that would never come, to make peace with someone who only knew how to make chaos. And then, one day, something clicked. Maybe it was God, Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the quiet voice in your spirit saying, "You are allowed to leave." You didn't leave with bitterness. You left with boundaries. And that boundary, that bold, beautiful, sacred boundary, was called no contact. The narcissist hopes you'll forget that boundary, that you'll feel guilty, that you'll feel lonely, that you'll interpret your grief as a mistake instead of a consequence of healing. They hope you'll get tired of the silence and start talking again, because if you speak, even just once, they can twist your words, reopen the door, rewrite the story. They can sink their claws back into your empathy, the very thing they manipulated from the beginning. But here's the shift. When you went no contact, you didn't just walk away from them. You walked toward yourself, toward the woman or the man who finally chose peace over performance, who decided that being misunderstood was better than being emotionally manipulated, who accepted that silence can be heavy, but it can also be holy. You are not weak for missing them. You are not broken for grieving. That is your humanity showing. But you are powerful when you choose not to act on that grief. When you feel everything and still say nothing. When you let silence be your advocate, your protection, your final word. They're watching, they're waiting, they're hoping. But your stillness, that is your storm. Your silence, that is your sentence. And your refusal to return, that is your redemption. Let them hope, but don't let them have the satisfaction of being right. Because the moment you choose to keep that boundary, day after day, week after week, you become something they cannot conquer. You become untouchable, not because you're heartless, but because you finally have a heart that no longer negotiates its worth. So let them sit with their assumptions. Let them imagine you weak. That's the only story that comforts their ego. You're busy living a new story, one where they no longer get to be the author. 2. They hope you'll react to their bait. The moment you go no contact, a narcissist doesn't feel remorse. They feel strategy taking shape. They begin calculating their next move. Not to apologize, not to heal, not to face accountability, but to test the waters of your emotional boundaries. Because in their mind, silence doesn't equal severance. It equals setup. They don't believe you've actually moved on. They believe you're still in play, still paying attention, still secretly waiting. And so, they begin what I call the baiting phase. A silent war, fought through suggestion, illusion, and manipulation. All engineered to provoke one thing, your reaction. You may not even realize what's happening at first. The bait is rarely loud. It comes soft, subtle. They post a song lyric that reminds you of a time you shared. They upload a picture from a trip you once took together, knowing it will hit you like a wave. They quote a vague proverb about betrayal, timing, or being misunderstood. It could be about anyone, but you know it's about you. And that's no accident. These digital crumbs are left not for the world, but for a single pair of eyes, yours. The narcissist isn't reaching out directly because they know that would expose vulnerability, and vulnerability threatens their fragile ego. So they set the stage instead, quietly, calculatedly. They know the human brain craves meaning, and they manipulate that. They exploit your natural inclination to seek closure, to make sense of emotional loose ends, to connect dots even when the picture hurt, and all of it, the cryptic updates, the shared memories, the sudden visibility on your feed. It's bait. It's a hook wrapped in nostalgia, dipped in ambiguity, cast straight into the river of your thoughts. And they're watching, waiting, hoping you'll bite. But it doesn't stop with social media. Sometimes it's people. Mutual friends might mention their name in passing. You might receive a message saying they've been asking about you, or they said they miss the old times. Other times it's more invasive. They may accidentally run into you, or pretend to check on someone you know just to see how you'll react. Every gesture, every signal, is designed with one question in mind. Are you still emotionally available? Because here's what a narcissist truly fears. It's not your anger, it's your detachment. As long as you're reacting, even in rage or sadness, they believe they still occupy space inside your mind. To them, emotions are currency, and your reaction is a deposit into their fading sense of power. If you lash out, they win. If you reply, they win. If you like, click, check, or comment, they win. Not because they're interested in reconnection, but because they're addicted to control. They want proof that they still matter, that the spell they cast wasn't completely broken. Your reaction is their resurrection. And maybe you don't say anything out loud. But you think about replying. You feel the pull. You wonder if the post was meant for you. You catch yourself scrolling, interpreting again. That's the moment the bait is doing its job, not to bring you closer, but to pull you back into the mental trap you spent months, even years, trying to escape. Because if they can get you to question, they can get you to care. And if you care, they still have a foothold. But what they didn't expect, what they never prepared for, is your refusal to play the game. When you ignore the bait, you shatter their illusion. You send a message louder than any word. You no longer own real estate in my mind. You're not curious anymore. You're not decoding. You're not checking. You are free. And that freedom, it is a deafening silence to the narcissist. It is not indifference, it is war to them, because without your attention, their sense of self starts to crumble. Not because they miss you, but because they can't stand being irrelevant. The narcissist may escalate. They might up the stakes, more visible posts, more direct coincidences, more provocative messages. But each time you stay grounded, each time you don't respond, you're building a wall of dignity that they can't scale, and eventually they'll get desperate. But even then, your job remains the same. Do not react. You owe no one your attention, not when they used it to control you, not when they once manipulated your heart like it was a game board, not when they turned your empathy into weakness and your silence into suspicion. Your refusal to respond is not petty, it's not passive-aggressive, it's powerful. It is the manifestation of healing, because now you're not just surviving the narcissist, you're outgrowing the need to even acknowledge them. So when the bait comes, and it will, let it sink. Let them perform. Let them throw their illusions into the void and get nothing in return. Because your silence is no longer for them, it's for you. It's the sound of a soul that's finally at rest. And if you feel tempted, remind yourself of this. The person who once made you feel small doesn't deserve access to your emotional world. Not now. Not ever again. Comment below with the words, "I don't chase crumbs." Let it be your declaration that you're done reacting, done decoding, done shrinking your power just to give someone else a false sense of significance. 3. They hope you'll feel guilty for leaving. Guilt is a weapon. It doesn't pierce like a knife, and it doesn't leave bruises like a fist. It's more dangerous than that. It wraps around your mind like fog, subtle and suffocating. And the narcissist knows this. They rely on it. In fact, few things bring them more twisted satisfaction than watching you walk away from chaos, only to drag your own sense of morality behind you like a chain. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. When you leave a narcissist, they don't try to understand why. They don't reflect. They don't ask themselves, what did I do to push this person away? No, they flip the narrative before you've even closed the door. In their version of the story, you are the one who gave up. You're the cold one, the disloyal one, the emotionally unstable one. They edit reality until they are the victim, and you, the survivor, become the villain. They tell this story to others, and, more importantly, they want it to reach you. Through mutual friends, through quiet rumors, through social media posts laced with sanctimony and self-pity, not because they care what people think, but because they know you do. They know that you, the empath, the kind-hearted, the overgiver, have a deep-rooted need to be seen as good, as fair, as understanding. They use that against you. You see, narcissists are not just masters of manipulation. They are architects of emotional distortion. They don't just lie to others. They condition you to lie to yourself. And the biggest lie of all is that maybe you overreacted. Maybe you were too harsh. Maybe they weren't that bad. Maybe, just maybe, if you'd been more patient, things would have changed. But that's not guilt. That's trauma echoing back at you. That's emotional erosion disguised as self-reflection. You didn't walk away because you were heartless. You walked away because your soul was being slowly dismantled, not all at once, but piece by piece, through gaslighting, through devaluation, through the endless cycle of love and punishment that left you emotionally bankrupt. The narcissist knows this. Deep down they feel it, but they cannot admit it, because to do so would require facing the truth of who they are, and the narcissist has spent their entire life running from that mirror. So, instead of turning inward, they turn outward. They project their shame onto you and call it your failure. They paint your boundary as betrayal, and they don't stop there. They may reach out in moments that seem tender, messages that sound like remorse. I've been thinking about you. I wish things could have been different. You didn't deserve how things ended. But don't mistake these lines for repentance. They are not olive branches. They are fishing hooks. And the bait isn't affection, it's your guilt. Because guilt makes you question your strength. It makes you rewrite your own memories. It softens the truth and idealizes the illusion. The narcissist wants you stuck in that space, in between the pain they caused and the version of them you once hoped they could be. And if they can keep you there, frozen between trauma and fantasy, they never truly lose you. They don't need you back in the relationship. They just need you back in doubt. Because doubt leads to openness. Openness leads to cracks in your boundary. And once there's a crack, they can get their foot back in the door. Not to love you, but to reassert their control. But the guilt you carry isn't proof that you did something wrong. It's proof that you still care, that you're human, that you have a moral compass. And that's what makes you different from them. You reflect. You take responsibility. You grieve not just the loss of the relationship, but the loss of what could have been. The version of them that never existed. The version of yourself that tried to hold everything together. The narcissist hopes you'll collapse under that guilt, that it will weigh heavier than your memory of what they did. They hope you'll contact them, not because you miss them, but because you want to relieve the ache of moral confusion. They want to offer you temporary relief in exchange for long-term control. But there's another path, one that doesn't require rewriting the past or denying your conscience. You can hold your sadness in one hand and your clarity in the other. You can mourn the good times while still acknowledging the truth of the bad. You can feel guilt and still stay gone, because guilt, when understood, can transform into wisdom. And wisdom says, love without accountability is not love. And forgiveness without change is just submission dressed up in spiritual language. When the narcissist hopes you'll feel guilty for leaving, What they're really hoping is that your moral depth will do their dirty work, that you'll punish yourself so they don't have to. But you don't owe them your guilt. You don't owe them your emotional labor. And you don't need to make your departure look palatable to the person who made staying unbearable. Walking away wasn't failure, it was deliverance. And the weight you feel in your chest? That's not guilt. That's freedom, breaking the surface for the first time. Or they hope you're still watching. There's a strange and haunting kind of performance that begins the moment you go no contact with a narcissist. You may think the curtains have closed, that the show is over, that walking away means you've exited the stage, but in their mind the spotlight never fades, and they are still performing, still speaking, still acting, still posturing, not to the world, not to their friends, but to you, to the audience they hope is still secretly watching from the shadow. You see, a narcissist doesn't just want to be seen, they want to be studied. They want your gaze, even in silence. Because attention, whether positive or negative, is the currency they live off. And when you go silent, it threatens the economy of their identity. So they shift gears. They become theatrical. They begin curating a version of their life that isn't meant to reflect reality, but to provoke reaction. Carefully edited photos, smiling selfies, vacations they never took before, romantic displays with someone new, sudden bursts of ambition and purpose that were absent during your time together. It all seems so ironic. You gave them everything, your love, your energy, your forgiveness, your effort, and yet now, when you've finally chosen to walk away, they become the version of themselves you begged them to be, not because they've grown, but because they need you to regret. They want you to see their so-called happiness and ache with confusion. They want you to believe you were the problem, that if only you had stayed longer, been more patient, loved harder, they would have blossomed. But that is the lie. That is the carefully painted illusion. Because here's the truth they'll never admit. They haven't changed. They've just switched costumes. The narcissist doesn't want healing. They want revenge. Revenge for your silence. Revenge for your dignity. Revenge for no longer orbiting around their chaos. And so they put on a display meant to trigger your doubt, to awaken your longing, to draw your attention like a flame in the dark. But the performance isn't sustainable because it isn't real. It's not built on transformation. It's built on projection. And the reason they do all this is terrifying in its simplicity. They hope you're still watching. They hope you still check their social media, still read between the lines of every caption, still compare your current life to their curated fantasy. They want to live rent-free in your head, occupying emotional real estate with stories they've manufactured. Because if they can convince themselves you're still watching, it means they're still important. It means they still have power. It means in some corner of your mind, you still belong to them. But here's what they fear. What makes their stomach drop at 3 a.m. when they check to see if you've viewed their story and find nothing. They fear your indifference. They fear your peace. They fear that your silence is not a waiting room, but a final decision. Because for all their noise and drama, the narcissist's greatest fear isn't your anger, it's your disinterest. Anger is still engagement. Grief is still a form of attachment. But indifference, that's spiritual liberation. When you stop watching, the show loses its meaning. When you no longer decode their messages, when you no longer refresh their feed, when you stop imagining their life after you, the production collapses, the applause dies out, the lights dim, because you are not the audience anymore. You are the author of your own story now. And it's in that moment, that gut-wrenching realization, that the narcissist confronts the one truth: they can't survive, that your world now spins without them. that they are no longer the axis of your identity, that your silence is not the setup for a return, but the closure to their chapter. What they never prepared for, what their ego cannot handle, is that you've stopped looking, that you're no longer reacting, that you don't need to see them to know you've made the right choice. Because the moment you stop watching, you stop needing validation. You stop asking, are they suffering, or do they miss me, or have they changed? None of that matters anymore. What matters is that you've changed, you've grown, and you're not playing the role they assigned you anymore. So let them post, let them pretend, let them chase shadows. But you're building a life that doesn't require performance, a life with depth, with honesty, with peace. Because when you stopped watching them, you started seeing yourself again. And that, more than anything, is what they never wanted you to do. 5. They hope you'll come back for closure. There is a wound that doesn't bleed, only burns. It's the kind of pain that doesn't scream out loud, but festers in silence, asking again and again, why? Why did it end like that? Why didn't they explain? Why did someone who once claimed to love you vanish like it never meant anything? That ache, the unspoken, unanswered ache, is the very thing a narcissist counts on. They hope you'll come back for closure, and they are betting that the weight of your confusion will eventually outweigh the weight of your boundary. You see, narcissists don't like conclusions. They don't like things to end on your terms. They don't want you to walk away with clarity or peace or understanding, because those things, those precious stabilizing truths, set you free. And if you're free, they can no longer influence you. So instead of closure, they leave you with a void, a silence filled with contradiction, a graveyard of half conversations, gaslighting, unspoken tension, and emotional cliffhangers that never quite resolve. They vanish mid-conflict. They abandon you mid-vulnerability. They disappear in the middle of your attempt to love them well. And all of it is done by design, because confusion is control, and closure to a narcissist is something far too dangerous to hand over. If they gave you the truth, you'd have the strength to stay gone. So instead, they give you fragments, loose ends, echoes, and then they wait, hoping that your longing for resolution will lead you straight back into their hands. They know how your mind works. They know you replay things, that you try to make sense of pain, that you're someone who values meaning, who wants to understand not just what happened, but why. And they exploit that noble desire. They hope that, in your pursuit of peace, you'll seek it from the very person who shattered it in the first place, that you'll call or write or message them asking for honesty, for context, for a chance to clear the air. But what they offer in return is never truth. It's more manipulation. They'll give you just enough vulnerability to keep you hooked. I've thought a lot about us, they might say. Or, I never got to explain my side. They won't give you full answers, just glimpses, just emotionally charged crumbs of something that looks like growth. But make no mistake, these aren't apologies. They're hooks, and each time you engage, you're feeding the very cycle that broke you. Closure in the hands of a narcissist isn't a gift. It's a tool. It's the carrot they dangle in front of you, so you'll step back into the space where they hold the pen to your story again. Because the longer you're looking to them for answers, the longer they remain the center of your emotional reality. They don't care about resolution. They care about relevance. They don't want to fix the damage. They want to keep you in a state of just enough confusion that you don't fully heal. And maybe part of you believes closure would help, that hearing the truth would set you free, that if they just acknowledged the pain they caused, you could finally rest. But here's the brutal truth. Someone who could look into your eyes while breaking you was never planning to give you the healing they stole. closure from them is a door you'll never find, because it doesn't exist in their world. You're not asking for closure from a conscious soul. You're asking for accountability from someone whose power depended on your disorientation. True closure doesn't come from their mouth. It comes from your decision. The moment you accept that the silence they left you with was their answer, that the disappearance was the confession, that the lack of remorse was the apology, you begin to reclaim your story. Closure isn't what they give, it's what you claim. When you finally stop asking the very person who broke your spirit to help you heal it. Let it sink in. The most powerful form of closure is choosing not to need it anymore. Because when you stop looking for meaning from chaos, you begin to rebuild from truth. When you stop chasing conversations that should have happened, you start creating the peace that was always possible without them. And yes, it hurts. It's painful to let go of the fantasy that one day they'll explain, that one day they'll sit across from you and speak plainly and honestly and finally give you what you deserve. But narcissists don't operate in reality. They operate in control. And as long as you're hoping for closure from them, you're still holding the thread that keeps the cycle spinning. So stop waiting at the door they locked behind you. Stop standing in a hallway of silence, hoping someone who never gave you peace will suddenly offer it now. Walk away, not because you have all the answers, but because you finally know the most important truth of all. You don't need them to understand what they did for you to be free from it. They hope you'll come back for closure, but your greatest strength will be walking away without it.